I had already set the table in my mind, each place marked, every dish planned down to the last crumble. The girls were excited. Nora had spent all morning cutting leaf-shaped place cards, dipping them in glitter and glue that would later crust the dining room floor. Lily asked if Grandma would make her cinnamon yams again, the ones with the tiny marshmallows. And I had smiled, said, of course, while stirring cranberry sauce that wasn't even for that day, just something I was making to feel closer to the moment, to that imagined room filled with laughter and warmth. We always hosted Thanksgiving every third year. It was our turn. The rotation was a silent rule passed down like china, unspoken but sacred. I'd already picked out the tablecloth, the wine, even the playlist. So when the phone rang that evening and I saw my mother's name, I answered without hesitation, assuming she might want to bring her pecan pie early. Her voice was quiet, almost clinical. "We've been talking," she said, "your father and I, and we think this year maybe we keep it simple. Just adults. Just adults." I repeated the words in my head before they reached my mouth. Then I said, "You mean no kids at all?" Thinking perhaps she'd lost her mind or misunderstood which holiday it was. But she clarified, "Your brother will still bring his, but they're older now, it's different. We just thought, your girls are a bit younger, maybe they wouldn't enjoy the adult conversations. Nora is 10, Lily is 8, old enough to understand exclusion, if not the adult politics behind it." I didn't speak for a moment, just listened to the way silence coded the other end of the line. She was waiting for me to agree, to be graceful, to play the accommodating daughter. I asked her once more, just to be sure, "So, my children aren't invited, but Matthew's are?" Her answer came like a shrug. "Well, they're practically teenagers. It's just easier that way. It's just easier." A simple phrase, sharp enough to pierce a decade's worth of softened moments. I hung up soon after, politely, said I'd think about it, but my hands were shaking by the time I placed the phone down. The girls were still in the other room, giggling about something they'd built from Legos. I stared at them through the doorway, feeling the warmth in their laughter and the cold that had entered my chest, dull and spreading. I remembered a birthday, Lily's 4th. My mother had forgotten to call. When I reminded her, she said, "Oh, right, the younger one," and laughed. I remembered how, last Christmas, she brought 3 presents for Matthew's son, and only 1 for each of mine. "Boys are just harder to shop for," she said. I remembered how, at the hospital, when Nora was born, she stayed for 20 minutes before leaving to beat traffic. But when Matthew's wife gave birth, she moved into their guest room for 2 weeks. Still, I made excuses. I softened it. I told myself it was generational, cultural, unintentional. But this was clarity. This was unmistakable. They had drawn a line. And for the first time, I realized I didn't need to redraw it. I needed to leave it there and walk away. That night, I told my husband we wouldn't be going. I expected him to argue, to try and mend what was fraying. But he nodded, quietly, like he'd seen this coming before I did. We made different plans, not out of spite, out of self-respect. We booked a cabin, just the 4 of us. I told the girls it would be a just us Thanksgiving, with matching pajamas and movies and pumpkin pancakes. They cheered. And yet, a part of me grieved. Not for the tradition, but for the illusion. For the years I spent trying to earn something that should have been freely given. For the empty chair I used to reserve for my parents in every joyful room I built. I didn't block their number. I didn't unfriend them on social media. I didn't even send a message to explain our absence. I let silence do the talking. And in the days leading up to Thanksgiving, that silence became a mirror they couldn't avoid. My mother left a voicemail 2 days before, her tone coded in performative concern. "Just checking in, haven't heard from you, hope everything's all right." As if the previous conversation had vanished from her memory. As if we were the ones behaving strangely. Then came the photos, posted by Matthew's wife, carefully curated to include everyone around that long oak table, except us. My mother beamed between my brother's children, one arm around each. The caption read, "Family, food, and love. So grateful this year." Grateful. The word scraped across my chest like sandpaper. Because love shouldn't need explanation. It shouldn't be measured or portioned or handed out like a prize. Still, I didn't reply. I didn't argue. I didn't defend my decision or ask to be seen. I just turned inward, like a house closing its shutters before a storm. And I focused on what was real. The cabin turned out to be perfect. It snowed the night before Thanksgiving, dusting the trees in white. The girls helped me cook. Lily mashed the potatoes with both hands, and Nora tried to braid the bread dough like it was her doll's hair. We laughed. We burned the first batch of cookies. We danced in wool socks. And for the first time in years, I didn't worry about keeping appearances for anyone. But peace has a price. And mine was paid days later when I opened my credit card statement. At first, I thought it was a mistake. A few charges I didn't recognize. Restaurant bills, a boutique I'd never heard of, and a hotel in Asheville. But when I looked closer, the names were familiar. The boutique was one my mother loved. The hotel? I remembered her mentioning a quick getaway with my father earlier that month. I called the bank, asked for verification. The charges were real. And worse, they were from a card I'd added her to years ago, back when she helped me with the kids during maternity leave. I'd forgotten it even existed. She never asked, never mentioned it, just kept using it. I stared at the total, $1,743.68. Not the amount that broke me, just the message behind it. That even now, she felt entitled. Entitled to my silence, my labor, my credit. I removed her name from the account. Then I called her, calmly. "I saw the statement," I said. She laughed as if I'd caught her borrowing a scarf without asking. "Oh, that. I meant to tell you. We were in a pinch. Your father's card wasn't working." I waited for the apology, for some recognition of the boundary crossed. It never came. Instead, she sighed. "You've become so sensitive lately." And in that moment, I saw her clearly, not as a mother, not as a grandmother, but as a woman who believed love meant convenience, who measured worth by obedience, who used guilt like currency. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, "You won't be using my name again." And I hung up. The next week, we got a Christmas card from them. It was addressed only to my husband. Inside, a typed note read, "We hope you and the girls have a good holiday. Maybe next year things will feel normal again." Normal. As if we were the problem. As if silence had not been our only shield. But the worst was still to come. A beige envelope arrived in January, formal and thin. Inside was a typed letter, cold, legal in tone. They were requesting reimbursement. "For the cost of your upbringing," it began, "including but not limited to shelter, education, and basic care, totaling an estimated $47,000. I read it twice. Then again. It wasn't a joke. It was notarized. My husband stood beside me in the kitchen, one hand on my shoulder, as I read the list of debts. My childhood had been itemized, monetized, weaponized. They had raised me like a loan, and now they wanted to collect. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I thought there would be tears, or rage, or some primal wave of heartbreak that would crack me open, but all I felt was stillness. A quiet so deep it pressed against my ribs. I folded the letter neatly, placed it back in the envelope, and set it on the counter like it was no different from a grocery list. Then I brewed a cup of tea. There's a kind of pain that sharpens everything around it. I noticed the whir of the heater, the exact way the spoon clinked against the mug,
the curve of steam rising in the late afternoon light. It was as if my body knew this moment needed recording, like it was building a memory I'd never be allowed to forget. My daughters came home from school, backpacks swinging, faces flushed from the cold. I smiled at them, knelt to take their coats. I didn't let the letters stain the moment. I wouldn't let my parents' entitlement reach them. That was the line now. Later that night, after the girls were asleep, I opened my laptop. Not to respond, to observe. To trace the logic of people who believed their role in your origin gave them control over your life. They didn't just want money. They wanted my surrender. They wanted me to feel indebted, small, ungrateful, wrong. They wanted me to flinch, to fold, to come crawling back with apologies and compromise. That letter wasn't about reimbursement. It was about obedience. So I did what they never expected. I called my lawyer. We didn't need to do much. The letter was baseless, legally laughable. You can't bill your adult child for being a parent. But I wanted it on record. I wanted to draw my line in ink, not air. I had my lawyer draft a formal cease and desist, clear, direct, unshakable. It said exactly what I never got to say as a child. Enough. I mailed it on a Monday. By Thursday, my father called. I didn't answer. By Friday, my mother sent an email. This is not the daughter we raised. She was right. The daughter they raised bent herself backwards to be liked, to be accepted, to be chosen. She smiled through disappointment. She excused cruelty. She showed up even when uninvited. But I wasn't that girl anymore. And still, they tried. Small, subtle attempts, messages wrapped in concern. Guilt dressed as love. We're worried about you. The girls shouldn't grow up without grandparents. You've changed. Each word another tug on a rope I no longer held. And yet, part of me still ached. Not for them, but for the hollow space where family should have been. For the birthdays missed, the milestones ignored, the years spent performing daughterhood like it was theater and not truth. I wanted to believe it could be fixed, that if I said the right thing, they'd suddenly see me. But clarity is a one-way mirror. Once you see through it, you can't go back. I gave them space, weeks, then months, hoping silence might teach what words never could. But they didn't reach out again, not with love, not with remorse. Only through others. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years texted me out of nowhere. Your mom said you've been acting distant. Everything okay? I didn't reply, because I wasn't going to be pulled back into the web of secondhand guilt. I had spent too long being the family translator, decoding silences, absorbing tensions, smoothing over harm. That wasn't my role anymore. One night, I found myself sitting on the back porch, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, watching snow fall in the halo of the porch light. My husband brought me tea, sat beside me without speaking. We watched in silence. Then I said, almost absently, "It's strange. You think when people show you who they are, it'll hurt more." He nodded. Sometimes it does, but sometimes it's relief. I exhaled. Not from pain, from release. They stopped sending letters after that. No more thin envelopes, no more legal threats. Just a flat, persistent void. A vacuum where once there had been noise, manipulation masked as conversation, obligation dressed as tradition. And in that void, I found something unexpected, stillness that didn't ache. My mornings were quieter now, the kind of quiet that isn't emptiness, but peace. I started making pancakes every Sunday, not the box kind, real ones from scratch, with vanilla and cinnamon and a little nutmeg. Lily liked hers shaped like hearts. Nora stacked hers like towers, daring gravity. It was such a small thing, but every time I flipped a pancake, I felt like I was reclaiming something they'd taken, joy without approval. The girls never asked why we didn't visit Grandma and Grandpa anymore. Children don't need a PowerPoint presentation on loyalty. They feel things. They watch you more than they listen to you. They knew. Not the details, but the tone, the texture of a family that no longer included them feeling like shadows. I had started writing again, Nothing for publication, just small, sharp notes on scraps of paper, things I never said out loud. Things like, "Love that needs proof isn't love," or "Sometimes healing looks like silence." I'd fold them up and slide them into the drawer by my bed like prayers no one would answer. Then, one afternoon, Matthew called. I hadn't spoken to him in months, maybe a year. He didn't start with pleasantries. "They told me what you did," he said. What I did. As if protecting my daughters, severing a toxic cord, and defending my autonomy was some kind of betrayal. "They're devastated," he added. "They talk about you like you've died." I said nothing. Let him fill the space with his version of the story. He talked about duty, about aging parents, about forgiveness. Then, the punchline. "They're not perfect, but they're still our family." I almost laughed. Because perfection was never the price. All I ever wanted was decency, acknowledgement, the bare minimum of respect. And still, they offered even less and demanded even more. "They used your credit card, Matt," I said. "They tried to bill me for my childhood." He paused, just for a second. Then his voice hardened. "They were hurt. People do stupid things when they're hurt." I nearly whispered it, more to myself than him. So do children. And no one ever made excuses for me. He hung up not long after. I knew that would be the last time we spoke, because his loyalty wasn't to truth. It was to comfort, to the illusion of unity, no matter how rotten the core. And still, I didn't send the screenshots, didn't forward the statements, didn't justify. I let him live in the version he needed. I was done auditioning for clarity. A month passed, then another. Spring crept in quietly, softening the air. The girls picked daffodils from the backyard and arranged them in chipped mugs. We started walking to the library on Saturdays. The world felt smaller and safer. Then, a knock at the door. It was my mother. She stood there in a beige coat, holding a tin of cookies like we were still playing house. I didn't invite her in. She looked thinner, not fragile, just less certain, as if her armor had slipped in the car ride over. "I wanted to see you," she said, "in person." I waited. She glanced behind me, toward the hallway, maybe hoping to catch a glimpse of her grandchildren. "I miss you," she added, her voice breaking slightly. I didn't speak. I didn't move. "I've made mistakes," she said, finally, "but we're still your parents. That doesn't just end." I looked at her, really looked, and for a moment, I saw her not as my mother, but as a woman whose tools were crumbling, who had built her identity on control and found herself powerless in the face of consequence. Still, I said nothing. She handed me the tin. I didn't take it. "I understand," she whispered. Then she turned and left. The tin of cookies sat on the porch for 2 days. I didn't bring it in. I didn't open it. I let the weather do what it does, soften the lid with dew, curl the label at the edges. Eventually, it was the wind that knocked it over. A thud, a roll, the clatter of tin on concrete. The girls heard it and asked what it was. I told them it was nothing. They didn't press. And I didn't explain. Some truths don't need to be taught. They're inherited, like instinct or caution. My daughters had seen enough to know the difference between being wanted and being tolerated, between real affection and conditional love. They didn't ask for updates. They didn't ask when we'd see them again. They just folded themselves into the life we had built, a life that was finally free of apology. But inside me, a kind of mourning still pulsed, not loud, not consuming, just quiet and constant, like a bruise that never fully healed. I thought of the years I spent trying to prove I was worthy, how every small win, a compliment, an invitation, a shared laugh, had felt like a reward instead of a right. I had begged to be seen by people who wore blindness like a crown. And still, I grieved. Because what they took from me wasn't just peace, it was the illusion that love, once earned, could be safe. I started therapy. Not to fix anything really, just to hear my own story told back to me without distortion, to put down the weight of being the ungrateful daughter, the difficult one, the overreactor. My therapist listened more than she spoke, and when she did speak, her words were like pins popping old, swollen myths. "They trained you to accept imbalance," she said once, "and when you stopped accepting it, they called it betrayal." I nodded, because it was true. I had been raised to see silence as loyalty, to see sacrifice as love. But silence had only made me a ghost in my own life, and sacrifice had only made them comfortable. So I started reclaiming things, small things mostly. I changed the locks, not out of fear, out of principle. I cleared out the old boxes in the attic, letters, photos, cards that once felt sacred. I kept what mattered, burned what didn't. There was a photo of my mother holding Nora as a baby. Her face leaned in close, her eyes soft. For a moment, I considered keeping it. But then I remembered the voicemail she left when I didn't bring the girls to Easter. The way her voice turned icy, biting. "You always ruin everything." And I let the photo go. Sometimes healing looks like fire. The girls began asking new questions, not about my parents, but about family, about who gets to be in it. Nora asked why we always send holiday cards to Aunt Rachel, but never to Grandma. I told her the truth. Because Aunt Rachel loves all of us, fully, without making anyone feel small. She nodded, satisfied. Children don't need complex answers, just honest ones. I started noticing the gaps less, the absences, the birthdays without their calls, the holidays without their names. What used to ache now felt like clarity. And then, one evening, I received an email. It was from my father. 3 lines. "We heard about Lily's science fair win. Congratulations. We hope she knows we're proud." No punctuation, no warmth, just presence stripped bare. I didn't respond. Because pride means nothing if it's only given in silence, and love means nothing if it arrives too late. Pride should come with applause, with arms that open, not emails that arrive like bills, uninvited, cold, and overdue. I didn't show Lily the message. I didn't mention it at all. Because what would it teach her? That love hides behind screens and syntax? That her achievements are only validated by those who once ignored her existence?
No. My daughter deserved better than that, so I showed her something else instead. I printed her project, framed it, hung it in the hallway. Every time she passed it, she smiled, not because someone approved, but because someone saw her, right there, in full. Recognition should not be rationed like water in drought, and I would never again like anyone make my children thirsty. Weeks passed. The weather turned. Spring softened into early summer. We planted herbs, basil, mint, and lavender. Nora named the basil Sir Leafington. Lily tried to teach the mint to grow in the shape of a heart. I watched them through the kitchen window, hands dirty, eyes bright. And it hit me. This was the family I had always longed for. One built in warmth, not war. One where no one had to earn their place at the table. The more I embraced this piece, the clearer I saw the pattern. How every olive branch they offered had thorns. How every apology came with conditions. My brother sent me a message out of nowhere. Not to check in, not to rebuild, just a quick, sterile note. "They're not doing well. Thought you should know." Not a single question about me, about my girls, just more smoke signals, more guilt by proxy. I didn't reply, because what they really wanted was my return to silence, to compliance, to the family myth that they were loving, that I was unstable, that the fracture came from me. But I knew better now. I wasn't broken. I had just stopped bleeding for people who called their knives misunderstandings. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I found an old photo tucked into the back of my closet drawer. It was from my wedding. My parents stood behind me, smiling. My mother had her hand on my shoulder.
My father's tie slightly crooked. I stared at it for a long time. It was strange how grief could feel like a memory, soft around the edges, quiet, not begging for attention. I thought about what I would say to them if I had the chance, if I let them in for one more conversation. Not a fight, not a plea, just a final truth. You made me think love was something I had to qualify for. You made me chase scraps and call it a meal. And when I finally asked for something real, you handed me a bill. I didn't need them to understand. I just needed to stop needing them. So I took that photo, placed it in an envelope, and mailed it back. No note, no message. Just an image of the story they insisted still existed. Let them keep it. I was done. The girls started asking more about my childhood, where I grew up, what my parents were like. I told them what I could, the parts that didn't cut too deep. I said, they did some things well, but they forgot that love isn't control, and I won't forget that with you. They didn't ask more. They didn't need to. Later, Lily hugged me out of nowhere, tight, fierce. "You're my safe place," she said into my shoulder. I closed my eyes and breathed it in. Because no one ever said that to me, and now they did. It's strange, the way absence can become a kind of presence. My parents didn't exist in our daily life anymore, and yet their absence shaped the silence. Not like a ghost, more like a missing tooth, noticeable at first, but over time, your tongue stops searching for it. I began to reclaim holidays, not just the major ones, Thanksgiving, Christmas, but the minor ones, forgotten ones, Tuesdays, first snows, the last day of school. I turned them into celebrations, not loud ones, just soft rituals, warm scones, music in the kitchen, notes slipped into lunchboxes with terrible jokes that made the girls groan and laugh at once. We made new traditions, ones that didn't depend on being good enough to be invited. It was a Saturday when Nora came back from a sleepover and mentioned, almost offhandedly, "Leela's grandma picks her up from school sometimes. Do you think we'll ever have that again?" I didn't flinch. I didn't rush to fill the air with platitudes or distractions. I said, "Probably not."
She nodded. Okay. It wasn't okay, and we both knew that. But it was honest, and sometimes honesty is the most loving thing you can offer a child. Still, I watched her that evening, quieter than usual. She stared out the window at nothing in particular. I wanted to fix it, to promise something. But I also knew this wasn't a wound I could suture with stories. It was hers now, a scar in the shape of a family that should have been. And yet, even that pain had edges I could soften. I told her stories that night, not about my parents, but about us. How I met her father. How she kicked so hard in the womb I thought I was growing a kangaroo. How the moment she was born, she didn't cry. She just stared up at me, blinking, as if she already knew everything. She laughed, curled closer, and asked for one more. And that's what healing really looks like, telling a better story, not lying, not pretending, just choosing which moments get the light. A few weeks later, I received a letter. Not from my parents, from an attorney. They had drafted a will. It named Matthew as executor, left him the house, a few assets. It mentioned the girls briefly. We leave $500 each, contingent upon ongoing contact. Contingent. Even in death, they were trying to trade affection like currency. I shredded it. I didn't tell the girls. They didn't need to know that love could be itemized. The truth is, I didn't hate them. I didn't even resent them anymore. That's what startled me most. My silence wasn't bitterness. It was boundary. It was a decision made so many times, it became muscle memory. Because forgiveness isn't always reconciliation.
Sometimes it's simply refusing to let someone else define your worth. Summer turned to fall. The girls started a new school year. We went apple picking one weekend, just us. Came home sticky and sun-warmed, laughing over who picked the ugliest apple. I watched them from across the table and it hit me. Not like thunder, but like rain easing in quietly after drought. I wasn't missing anything anymore. What I lost was never really mine to keep. What I kept was real, whole, unconditional. They never apologized. They never admitted what they did. But that no longer mattered. Some victories don't come with confessions, just peace. One day, out of nowhere, I received an email. Subject line, "I hope you'll read this." No name, just text in the body, unsigned. I've been thinking about everything. I don't know how to fix what's been broken. I don't know if it can be, but I want to understand. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. I read it twice, then closed the laptop. There was no apology, no ownership, just a vague, trembling attempt at repair without the architecture of truth. It was too little, too late, and still trying to center their need to feel better without acknowledging the damage they'd caused. Understanding doesn't come without listening, and they never really listened. Still, I didn't delete it. I let it sit there, unopened in spirit, even opened in screen. Some wounds don't bleed anymore, but they still hum under the surface, like the low buzz of an old refrigerator you've grown used to. I never replied. Not out of cruelty, out of choice. I had said everything I needed to say, in action, in silence, in the way I chose to live. I didn't need to explain my boundaries to people who never respected them to begin with. And I didn't need to reopen doors just because someone knocked too softly to be heard. What came next wasn't triumph. It was simplicity. Lily had a recital in December. She played piano, haltingly, beautifully, each note like a footstep across ice. Nora made signs that said, "Go Lily," in glitter so thick it flaked across the floor of the auditorium. My husband held my hand the entire time, his thumb brushing against mine in a quiet rhythm I'd come to associate with steadiness. Afterward, we went for cocoa. We wore scarves and too many layers. We walked home under soft, falling snow, our laughter leaving trails behind us in the cold night air. No audience, no applause, no grandparents waiting at the end of the hallway to hand her flowers. But Lily didn't notice. She was too busy telling us how her fingers slipped in the second stanza and how next time she wouldn't mess up. We told her she didn't mess up, that she played like someone who meant it, and her smile in that moment erased everyone I had once faked for approval. Later that night, after everyone was asleep, I sat by the window and watched the snow settle on the street. The lights dimmed, the house held its breath, and I thought of everything it had taken to get here. All the years spent doubting myself. All the times I said yes when I meant no. All the moments I twisted myself into shapes to be acceptable, palatable, obedient. Gone. Not forgotten, just no longer in control. There's a certain power in knowing you don't need revenge, that the greatest retaliation is peace, real peace, the kind that doesn't perform, that doesn't flinch, that just is. They taught me many things. How to walk on eggshells, how to smile through tension, how to pretend that love was enough, even when it came with conditions. But life taught me something else. That loyalty isn't a leash. That silence can be a sentence, but it can also be a sanctuary. That family is not defined by blood, but by presence, by consistency, by kindness. My daughters will never have to wonder if they're enough. They will never need to audition for love. And if the only thing I accomplish in this life is breaking that cycle, then it will have been enough. We don't speak anymore, and somehow that silence feels holy. Some people believe closure comes in conversation, that there's always one final talk, one clean break, one teary apology to tie the past into a neat bow. But I've learned that real closure is quieter. It arrives without ceremony, sometimes in the way you stop checking your phone, or how you no longer imagine their face when you set the dinner table. It comes in the ease of breath, in the space left behind by anger, in knowing that the absence isn't a wound anymore. It's just space, and you can fill it. I filled mine with laughter, with stories told under blankets, with ordinary days that didn't need to be earned or edited for anyone else's comfort. I filled it with knowing that I am no longer the person who bends. I am the person who stands. The girls are older now. They don't ask about my parents anymore. The questions have faded, like echoes in a room we no longer visit. What they remember is what matters. The Saturday pancakes, the garden in spring, the way their mother never flinched when love asked her to choose between them and blood. And when they look back at their childhood, they won't see abandonment. They'll see protection. Because I didn't walk away in bitterness. I walked away in love. For them, for myself. Sometimes people ask if I ever miss them. I think they expect me to say yes. But the truth is, I don't miss what never really existed. I miss the idea of them. The version I used to invent late at night. The one I clung to every time I excused their cruelty as confusion, their favoritism as forgetfulness. I miss the comfort of the lie I told myself, that if I was just a little better, they'd finally see me. But I don't miss them, and I don't regret leaving, because what I've built in their absence is stronger than anything I ever built in their presence. My home, my girls, myself. This is the life I was supposed to have, not the one I was handed. The one I carved, slowly, painfully, deliberately, out of silence and truth, and finally, peace. There is no dramatic ending here, no last-minute forgiveness, no phone call that undoes years of damage. Just a woman who stopped waiting.
Who looked at the open door and instead of asking why they left, asked why she ever stayed. They taught me how to lose myself. And in losing them, I finally remembered who I was. If this story left a mark, if you've ever been made to feel small by the very people who should have protected you, then you're not alone. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that walking away isn't weakness, it's clarity. Subscribe for more stories of quiet revenge, unapologetic peace, and the strength it takes to start again. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can say is nothing at all. Thank you all for listening to my story until the very end. I hope that, even just a little, what I've shared can bring something meaningful to you. Goodbye, and see you again.